podcast that you're listening to is being presented to you with the cooperation of the SJ Network. If you're a person who needs a publicist and you want to appear on podcasts, contact Stephen Joyner at s-j-network.com. Let's get on with the show.
Kenney Big Skinny Poke of the YouTube show, Casual Conversations, is today's guest.
I know. He used the name Big Skinny when he was a radio personality in Texas. Maybe the Sherpa needs a radio name.
That's a good idea. Let's give him a name that fits. How about the Short Harry?
I like that idea. I think it has a nicer ring to it than cheap unfunny.
Attention, rebels of the Sherpalution. Today's podcast is being brought to you by Audible. You can get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/Sherpa. There are over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. And now Mr. Bruce will lead you into the Sherpa Chalet. As a reminder, a podcast from this high altitude might make you think the Sherpa is funny.
Welcome to Too Many Podcasts, the podcast about podcasts. Now, podcasting from the Sherpa Chalet on Mount Podcastia, here's your host, Jim, the Podcast Sherpa.
Hey there, look at what you've done. You've hit the play button, so now you're listening to Too Many Podcasts. Wait. Just because it's me, Jim the Podcast Sherpa, no reason to run. Well, at least run away from this podcast anyway. So, how you doing, rebels? We are the podcast about podcasts, just in case you've never been here, and so much more. And I'll bet you want to know a little bit about our guest today.
Who's our guest today, Sherpa?
His name is Big Skinny, Kenney Pope. He has had a history in country radio, and now Big Skinny has his own YouTube show, and it's called The Podchack Presents Casual Conversations with Big Skinny. And we spent a little time together, and we talked about his days in radio and, of course, his vodcast, Casual Conversation. And we had our own casual conversation ourselves. And by the way, Kenney also provides services as a voiceover artist and doing audio work too. And to give you a sampling of his work, I had a little audio difficulty on my end, so Kenney did the recording on this. And you can hear his handiwork and how nice it sounds. It definitely sounds like we're in the same room, but believe it or not, I'm on Mount Podcastia, and he is home in Fort Worth, Texas. But you'd never know unless I told you that, right? If you want to hear how good it sounds, have a listen to my interview with Big Skinny. Hello there, rebels. We are in the radio room at the Sherpa Chalet. And what better guy to have in a radio room than a former radio personality? His name is Kenney Big Skinny Pope. He is today's guest, and we're going to get to know him. And he's got a podcast, a video podcast called Casual Conversations. So welcome to the show, Kenney. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. How you doing? How's New York tonight?
New York is actually starting to warm up. It's not feeling like the Arctic tundra anymore.
So you're saying Frosty the Snowman would not survive the day?
Not unless he doesn't mind being a hat and a carrot.
Depends on where the carrot was, brother.
Yes. And I think we should probably issue a little warning before we proceed with our interview with Big Skinny. As we were getting set up with our interview, I was trying to get a Bluetooth signal, and apparently we came across Danny's TV for a Bluetooth signal. So we're guessing that Danny might be in some sort of trouble if he's watching it through Bluetooth.
Yeah. And Danny's mama, if you're listening right now, you wouldn't believe the stuff the guy's watching.
I don't think that's SpongeBob. There are too many moving parts over there.
It's not appropriate content for a man that age.
That's very true. That's very true. But anyway, we'll have to deal with Danny later. Tell me about the world of Big Skinny. How'd you get started?
Well, back in the day, just always when I was in high school, my goal was to be in radio. I don't know why. I just found it very fascinating. I grew up listening to AM, FM radio like most people in my bracket age group. It was very fascinating listening to the DJs we had on the air at the time. I mean, Casey Kasem's American Top 40 was a big one when I was growing up. Then we had some local DJs here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area that, you turn on your radio on on a weekday morning and listen to these guys talking. You're just like, man, I want to do that for a living. And then I remember I was working, promoting concerts for this little small venue, and they asked me to go into the radio station and do some commercials for them. When I walk in, the first thing I saw is this guy with his feet on a desk, sitting there in the DJ booth, just kind of chilling, with the microphone. He wasn't doing any talking at the time, but he was just sitting there chilling as music was playing. I'm like, yeah, this is the job I want right here. So I was sold. I mean, I just really wanted to be in radio. So while I was there doing the recording thing, I'd ran into another DJ that was there doing something, because anybody that's worked in radio knows you don't just have one job. You're not just on the air and then you go home for the day. Hey, I work my 3 hours and I'm going home. It doesn't work like that. You have to put in your time, whether it be a program director, whether it be sales, whether it be producing commercials, whatever. You have another job. It's not just being a DJ. There was another DJ that was working there, and I was asking her, how do you get into this? Because at that time, they had dropped a restriction where you need a license to be on the air. So now anybody could be a DJ. God help us all. But it was, it was kind of cool, because she said, well, most people start at the bottom. They start out as a grunt and they work their way up. So that's what I did. I started out as a grunt, worked my way up to where I had my own afternoon show. It was on every day from 3 to 7 in the afternoons here in the Dallas-Fort Worth. Well, actually, it was just south of Dallas-Fort Worth, but it was in that Metroplex area.
So what kind of music did you play?
I worked for a country radio station, so I did a lot of country radio. I started off in a really, really old, the first station I worked for was out of a little small town just south of Dallas-Fort Worth, and I played a lot of old depressing country. I mean, like 50s, 60s country. I mean, it was depressing. You would spin that stuff for about 4 hours. And on Saturdays, the cool thing about working weekends was that's all you did. You were just a DJ. So when your shift was over, you could go home. So I'd go in, I'd work my 3-4 hours. I'd come out all depressed, get in my truck and, aim it towards a bridge.
The songs were inspiring you that much?
Oh my God, dude. I thought, if we could just play these records backwards, everything would go in reverse, man. The guy would get his wife back. His dog would come back to life. His truck would start running again. I mean, it was just some bad stuff, man.
Do you remember your first day on radio?
I remember some of my first days. Now, when I first started out, the very first stuff I had on air, it was kind of wild, because I was working for this little small community station. It was AM. I remember they had like a Sunday morning religious programming type deal. So you would have to I would fill in between church services. They would be recording doing different church services, and you would play music in between services until the next services were ready. Then you'd cut into that service or whatever. So I would do a little bit of practicing, honing my DJ skills, during that time. And, I was out picking up gospel records and all kinds of stuff. I would go to these venues and find gospel artists and find new music and all kinds of stuff to play. And so I kind of made it my own deal, as I went above and beyond what they were asking me to do. But, I wanted to learn. I was hungry to learn. In
the time that you worked in country radio, did you ever get to interview any country singers?
Yeah, I've interviewed a lot of artists along the way. Now, most of my interviews, oddly enough, came when I started dabbling with internet radio. I had I would get these little internet radio gigs, and I would create my own little deal, and I would interview a lot of 70s and 80s artists that I grew up listening to. That was really my wheelhouse. That's what I grew up listening to. So I wanted to talk to those artists. I love country music to a point. It gave me my start in radio, and I'm always a big fan of 80s and 90s country, but the 70s and 80s rock, pop, top 40, that was my wheelhouse.
And it's funny, I think the 70s, especially the 70s stuff, was probably that first time when you really saw country music getting into the pop music genre. You heard a little bit more about like Kenny Rogers and Mac Davis and John Denver, even though I know lots of people don't call him country.
Yeah, I tell you what was the big change for country music happened right around the time Urban Cowboy came out, because then all of a sudden it was hip to have a pickup truck. It was hip to be listening to country music. I think that's when country music really took off. It's always been a big deal, because there are going to be people they'll tell you back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, country was always a big deal. But I think it really hit the mainstream as most things do. The times dictate what is popular and what isn't.
It seems to go through a lot of changes, though. I was really a big fan during the 90s, especially. I guess when they had the no hats era, what they referred to some of the artists. A lot of them are like, I guess maybe because I'm a little older. A lot of them are like much younger now, it seems. And they kind of seem to be on that cusp of they really embraced the traditional, real country singers like Johnny Cash, Merle Haggard, Willie Nelson. Yeah. But they had kind of like a pop sensibility too, to kind of know how to
cross
reach
over
audiences.
Yeah, they were crossover. Like Kenny Rogers, he could put out a song like Reuben Jane, and then, he'd put out a pop song or one that would cross over into a pop. You even had at one point, you had Lionel Richie crossing over to country, with his song Stuck on You. I mean, there was a sensibility where you could cross over. Now, with the music that's out there now, it's like the genres are so, the lines blurred. I mean, between rap and country. And I mean, it's crazy. It's hard to me, country music isn't what it used to be. Not at all.
And it's funny because I'm sure, we're probably within the same age range, and we probably grew up with it being called country and western.
Yep. Yep.
And that seems to have gone away. It's like, okay, now it's country. Well, it's because it's somebody down south, singing.
So how old are you, Jim?
I am 58.
58. So I'll be 55 this year. So you're just a couple of years ahead of me. But yeah, man, same music. I grew up listening to stuff like the Bee Gees and Donna Summer and Chicago and stuff like that. That was my wheelhouse because that's the stuff my older brothers played. That's stuff I fell in love with Chicago. Chicago's one of my favorite bands of all time. Toto, another favorite band of all time. Stuff like that. That's the kind of stuff I dug, man. So it was cool to be in radio. If I could have been in a genre that I was really, really passionate about, it would have been a whole lot better deal for me. But I enjoyed my time, and it opened up a lot of doors for me. I met a lot of interesting people, and it was fun. The only thing, it doesn't pay any money. So, no matter how fun it is, if it doesn't pay the bills, it ain't good.
That is true. So how did you get into casual conversations?
A few years back, I was working for this little, I say working, I had a little internet radio station that I was doing for this little outfit out in Fort Worth where I grew up. And you would go in, you would pay them a certain amount of money a week, and then you could have your own little internet radio station. Well, when I started, I was doing I had a show called The Liner Notes. And basically, anybody that's looked at an album, they know what liner notes is. It gives you all the information about a record. You just pull it out, you look at it. Sometimes the lyrics are on there. Sometimes the artist, the people that helped with the record, producing it, the people that played on it, any of that kind of pertinent information is on that liner note. So that was kind of what the premise was of this. I would call these guys that I grew up listening to, and I would ask them questions and, just stuff that people, like me, always wanted to know. Like when I was growing up, I had bought, I don't know if you're familiar with the group, the Sanford Townsend Band, but they had a song back in the late 70s.
Smoke from the Distant Fire.
Smoke from Distant Fire. So I had this idea in my head, what I wanted to do. And so I just started reaching out, going to these different artist websites, and because Facebook wasn't real prevalent back then. So I'd go to these artist websites and I would send them emails trying to get, book an artist. So the very first guy that called me back was Johnny Townsend from the Sanford Townsend Band. He calls me back, and we sat there and talked for about an hour. Coolest dude you'd ever want to meet, man. And so we talked, and he was my first interview. And from that point, it kind of just snowballed. I started getting a little buzz about people wanting to come and interview with me because they'd heard something about my show, and so I was getting a little bit of interest. I mean, I interviewed the guy, Gary Wright from he did Dreamweaver. I interviewed Robbie Dupree, Stillaway, and Hot Rod Hearts. I interviewed him. Ambrosia, Burley Drummond with Ambrosia, and this, that, and the other. But I was getting artists to come on. So that was kind of what it was about. So one of the things I wanted to ask Johnny Townsend was, I had bought this album that they had put out, their very first album, and it had this flip-flops laying on the floor with a ribbon run through them. And so, I had this album since I was a kid, and I wanted to know what the significance of this picture was. And he told me it was some artsy-fartsy dude that wanted to, he wanted to do some kind of little project cover. Well, whenever they started printing so many of them, and the record company says, no, man, we can't have this on there. They redid it. So if you had that album, it was actually a collector's item because they only printed so many of those. And so there was stuff like that, things that I could get behind the scenes kind of stuff, And when I started Casual Conversations, I wanted something similar to that, but I didn't want to piggyback off that idea. I wanted to do the same kind of deal where I was interviewing these artists, but I wanted to come at them from a casual conversation, like two buddies sitting down talking and just kind of chilling, something a little more laid back and just kind of, that's something that my friends and family that have watched that said, man, you've got a really unique interviewing style, and we really like that, and you're really good at it. And so that's kind of what I wanted to do. I wanted something that was a little unique. I mean, because my thought process is, if this guy's explained to everybody 100 times why he broke up with the group Chicago on different YouTube channels, why does he need to come to my YouTube channel and tell my viewers the same thing when they can go to YouTube and find that answer elsewhere? I want to find out what this guy's like as a person. I want everybody to know what's his life like behind the scenes. He's an ordinary, everyday person just like you and me, and that's the kind of stuff I wanted to put out there for everybody to consume,
That is so true, though. I know a lot of them have got to be tired of, the same 5 questions that are going to come their way. And, there's probably even no thought that goes into it. They just kind of repeat it spontaneously. The words probably just come right out of their mouth. A while back, I was interviewing Sean Kanan, and he was in The Karate Kid 3. And when he was filming it, something happened with him, and he actually almost died. But every podcast that he goes on to asks him that question. And I was experimenting with my show, and I said, I want to do a thing where it's totally random questions. I said, I'm just going to throw, just everyday questions at you, kind of like what you're doing with your show. And he said, Jim, he says, thank you. He says, if one more podcaster was going to ask me, how did I almost die when filming Karate Kid 3? He says, I think I'm going to snap. I mentioned it on the show. I said, well, Sean got hurt. I said, but you'll have to listen to another podcast if you want to hear that story.
So, here's a couple of thoughts here. When I was doing an interview here and just recently with Scott Valentine from Family Ties, we were talking, and I want everybody to know Scott. We didn't talk a lot about as far as what it was like working with Michael J. Keaton, because we're talking about you, dude. We don't want to talk about Michael J. Keaton. Not that there's anything wrong with him, but this is an interview about you. So I wanted to keep it focused on him. Now, the direction I went with Scott was I wanted to find out what it was like as an actor working daily on a sitcom. What was your daily routine like? Because most of us sitting back here don't have any clue what these actors do on a daily basis. So from the time you get up in the morning to from Monday to Friday, how's your week? And that's kind of the stuff I wanted to find out. And we talked about some health stuff he had going on, that kind of stuff. But every interview is different if you give a person a chance to talk. If you give them a chance to be themselves. And when I just did an interview with Bill Champlin that I posted today on my video podcast. And Bill Champlin, everybody knows, he was with Chicago from Chicago 16 for about 28, 30 years. And he was with them for a lot of music. Well, towards the end of that, the relationship was getting it wasn't great. It was kind of, he was just fed up of being on the road and doing the same stuff over and over. He said that many times. He's just tired of doing the same songs over and over again. He wanted to be able to participate and do new material. But so it didn't end well for him in Chicago. Now, when I did this interview, I didn't want to get into him in Chicago. Everybody that interviews him wants to ask him about, what happened with you in Chicago? Well, if you want to know that, go to somebody else's podcast. We're going to talk to him about his new record. We're going to talk to him about what he's doing during the pandemic, how he's staying busy, what it was like making the new record, what was behind it, how'd you come up with the songs, that kind of stuff. I wanted to find out about stuff that was pertinent to him, not stuff that everybody wants to ask him about, just gossip stuff. And the people, they really appreciate it when you go that route. They appreciate you getting to know them, not so much about all the dirt that's out there on them, or what everybody considers to be dirt. You know what I mean?
Also, I guess with this pandemic, because so many people, especially touring musicians, they're home more. I had an interview with Scotty Morris, the lead singer of Big Bad Voodoo Daddy, and he just wasn't used to being home. He said, I've been on the road for 25 years. He said, this is the longest stretch of time that I've been at home. And we were at least able to talk about a lot of different things. We talked about the formation of the band. We talked about some of the songs and stuff like that. And then some of his writing process and some of his inspirations for songs. And, it's great when you get to kind of dig into, like you said, the beyond what's your favorite song on the album? Well, yeah, you've heard that 30 times today. Here's right. Number 31.
So we were doing an interview with Kenny Lee Lewis, the bassist from the Steve Miller Band. We could have talked about Steve Miller forever. That could have been the whole concept of the interview. But we're here to talk about you, Kenny. So let's talk about your likes and dislikes. What kind of hobbies have you taken up during the pandemic? Because I know you're home more. So we're talking about gardening. We're talking about planting tomatoes. The guy sending me stuff on Facebook about his garden. We've remained friends since then, which is really cool, man. Because you make a connection with these people, and it's not, to me, it's not just about doing a one-off interview. I want to make friends that stay in contact with each other. That's the kind of stuff I want to do, and that seems to be paying off, and meeting some really cool people with some really cool interests. And
as long as you get those guests that at least they want to come on and they want to have fun, and at least they're not too guarded. Did you ever get anybody who was a little guarded? You don't have to say them by name.
Oh my gosh! Well, I won't give you the name, but I'll give you, there was a real famous group back in the 70s called The Fifth Dimension. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Sure. Marilyn McGoo, Billy Davis Jr.
Yeah. Well, there was a couple other members in there, a woman, I won't give her name, man, but that was the worst interview I've ever done, man. I would ask her a question and it would be like, well, I can't really answer that. You have to ask so-and-so about that. And it was like, I got that for every question I ask. And I was like, this interview is going nowhere. So about 10 minutes in, I had to, it's been nice talking to you. Thank you so much for your time today. And had to let her go. But I've had interviews like that just, you could tell my philosophy is, okay, so I'm not going to come in with a set amount of questions. I'm not going to come in with a list of questions that we're going to get in. I'm going to ask maybe one question to get the ball rolling, and we're going to see where the conversation goes. Now, that only works if the guest wants to talk back to me, if they want to, communicate and kind of elaborate on the questions that were being asked, And as they're talking, I'm listening to what they're saying, and then I can kind of, dig deeper into another question that pertains to what they were talking about. That's the kind of way I want it to go. That to me seems more like a conversation than me having 10 questions I've got to get in no matter what you're talking about.
Sometimes, as with both of us as interviewers, I'm sure sometimes when you have that list, you get so focused on the list itself that you forget that, well, this is a conversation. We have to go back and forth. He's got to say something, and then I will respond. And then if it's just, what do you think about this? Yes, right.
If you're not listening, you're so wrapped up about asking these questions, and you're not really listening to what they're saying. It's like sometimes you go back and you edit your podcast, and you're like, oh my God, I didn't even know he said that. That's a surprise. That is something new. And he told you, but you weren't listening, So, I mean, you can't get so involved and wrapped up in those questions that you forget to listen to it, because a lot of times, man, that surprise that you get from that conversation or that interview, just that surprise on something you learn, it's kind of a good reaction for your audience. Oh my gosh, I didn't know that. That's kind of cool. That's neat information, So that's kind of that's the way I feel about it. Everybody has their own style, though.
About how many years did you work in radio before you started doing your show?
I was doing about 15 years in radio. And I started out, like I said, as a grunt, just being a guy that would stand there at the table and have you sign up for stuff and this, that, and the other. And then after a while, I was the guy that was in the van out doing remotes, So I would be on the deal saying, hey, come out and see Big Skinny. I don't even know if I was going to buy Big Skinny then. I'm Kenney, and I'm out here at the ballpark. We're out here giving away this, that, and the other. Come by and see me, get registered. So I would do that. I was doing that for a while. And that was really kind of a cool gig, man, because that opened up a really big door for me as far as meeting artists. We have back then we had a little local Fort Worth baseball team. They were a minor league team called the Fort Worth Cats. And I was out there working those games, getting people to come in and sign up. Well, while I was out there, I was getting really close to the people that ran the organization. I mean, they were in charge of everything. And so Bryan Adams and Def Leppard were going to do a big tour. It's going to be a big tour, but it was going to be for these small venues, these small stadiums. Well, this stadium was on that list of places for them to perform. Well, when I found out they were going to be there, I had went to the people there and said, hey, can y'all get us some can you get me a couple of backstage passes? They said, yeah, I think we can. So I wasn't for sure whether they were going to come through or not. Me and my cousin both wanted to go. And my cousin was a bigger Def Leppard fan than me. And he was one of those kind of guys that was always about one-upping you. So if I got something, he had to get something just a little bit nicer, a little bit better shape than mine. I get a nice truck. He's got to get an even better truck. He's going to one-up me. When we got to the venue, we had our tickets. I think we paid like $45 a piece for them. And we get to the venue. We're standing there by the entrance gate, and just kind of waiting to see what's going to happen. Well, all of a sudden, this guy appears at the front of the gate with two of these lanyards, these all-access passes, and hands them to me and says, hey, y'all come on in. And so I said, give me a second. We're going to run down here to the end of the street, see if we can sell our tickets. And I think we sold them for like $40 a piece, so we lost $5. So we went in, and we were standing there at the foot of the stage while Def Leppard was warming up, to do the concert. And then after they played, we were able to go backstage and hang out with them for a few minutes, kind of introduce ourselves and just kind of shoot the shit with them and that kind of stuff. Well, that was really kind of cool.
Sure. Who knew that, through a softball game, you'd be able to do something like that?
So my cousin, I'll never forget my cousin's expression. I mean, when we walked backstage and he's standing there and he's looking right there at Joe Elliott, walking backstage, and he's like, I don't think we're supposed to be back here. I said, dude, you got an all-access pass. That means you can go anywhere in the stadium. You don't have to, And so his jaw just hit the ground. He could not believe he was back there with Def Leppard. And I just turned at him. I turned to him and I looked at him and I said, you're never going to outdo me again. That's the last time you one-up me. Maybe. He never has. He never has one up me.
In your time that you've been doing all this between your show and the radio, are there any encounters that you have like all-time favorite memorable ones?
Yeah, a couple of years ago, me and my wife, we got tickets to a concert that was in another small town just south of us here, a little town in Mansfield, Texas, and they were having a yacht rock tour. And it was going to be, I think it was Yacht Rock was the name of the group, but it was like a big production. They would bring in different artists, 70s and 80s artists, and they would be the backup band, and then they would have like the former lead singers from these bands to come in and do the songs, but they would, play as the backup band or whatever. I found out that actually there was going to be Peter Beckett from Player was going to be there. They had the big hit Baby Come Back, and then Ambrosia was going to be there. Well, the cool thing about it is I had two connections from, one from each of those bands, and I could call them up and say, hey guys, I heard you guys were going to be in concert just about 20 miles south of us. We're going to come out and see you guys play. Would like to hang out. And so I called one of the guys up and said, hey, we're going to come see you. And he said, come on. He said, y'all just let us know when you get here. And so we got there, we pulled up, we got a place to park. And when I got there, both of those guys were up on the stage, and they were getting ready to warm up, getting ready to go. And the drummer from Ambrosia, Bertley, he says, hey, when the concert's over, y'all come on backstage and hang out. And so after the concert, me and my wife were backstage with all the band from, Player and Ambrosia. And I mean, that was really a cool experience. That was probably one of my favorite memories. Just really down to earth guys, man.
That is very cool. You don't get to experience the full concert feel with like what's going on in the performer's mind when they're waiting backstage or once they're done with their show.
Yeah, they're ready to get out of there and go. But, that was kind of cool. They invited us to hang out, And I will tell you this, those two guys are really cool individuals behind the scenes. They're really not your typical rock stars. They're not all ego driven. I mean, they'll take time to talk to you, and that kind of stuff. So it's really kind of cool. I've got Peter Beckett scheduled to do an interview with here in the next few weeks. So as soon as we get a time nailed down, he's going to be on the podcast as well.
And you'll be talking yacht rock.
And that's cool. We can talk about yacht rock, but I like it. He just moved into a brand new studio there, and I think they're in Washington State. They moved from California to Washington State. That's the first time maybe he's been out of California in forever. So that's going to be kind of interesting to see how his studio's doing there. I'm kind of excited about that. Just talk to him about his new studio. I'm all about audio. I don't know about you and how much you get into audio with your podcast, man, but I love, coming up with really cool, crisp sound for an audio, or your audio.
Yeah, I try. I try Big Skinny. I really do.
I've listened to your podcast, and it does sound pretty good, man. It sounds pretty good. There's a sportscaster that you kind of remind me of, kind of like Jim Rome or something. I'm thinking, you have that. Of course, you got that New York accent, but you got that like that Jim Rome, or maybe not Jim Rome. I'm trying to think of there's a sportscaster DJ that's trying to come to mind, and I can't for the life of me think of the name, but you give off that vibe, man. It's a good vibe though, because it feels like something that I'm used to listening to you.
That's so funny because a while back, I interviewed a lady, Dr. Andrea Wojnicki, and she hosts a business communications podcast, and we had a blast. And as we were winding down, she said, you know what? She said, you sound like the guys on the Car Talk podcast from NPR a number of years back.
Oh, wow. It's cool, man, to have a voice that's so familiar, and that's kind of if you're a DJ or a podcaster, you kind of want that because that kind of sets you apart from everybody else. There's a lot of people that, I know they try and they're trying to do it, and, hopefully they're having success with it, but man, that's a tough hurdle to climb, not having that voice for doing podcasting.
Somewhere down the line, I want to have like a little jingle for my show. Maybe it should be like, he sounds like somebody, Jim the podcast Sherpa.
I think you ought to have like Fran Dresser. Who is that voice?
Mr. Sheffield.
I think maybe like Fran Dresser doing if you could get her to come in and just do your jingle for you, when you get big enough, you should be able to do that, man. Just have her come in and do some recording.
Because this is a podcast about podcasts, what are some of your favorite podcasts? And you can even talk about some of your favorite YouTube shows too, because you are on that old YouTube thing.
Well, I've listened to yours. Yours is pretty good, and I will put a plug in for yours, the Sherpa. It is pretty good. It's cool to talk to people from different genres and different walks of life. So it's always cool to find out what, how is somebody a specialist in their field. So I do dig yours. I like Mike Rowe.
Checking him out.
Mike Rowe does a good. He did a good podcast. Not so much anymore. I think his podcast is done. But they had he had that podcast. I'm trying to remember what the name of it was. But
The Way I Heard It.
The Way I Heard It, man, that was greatness. You would listen to it, and it's kind of like, remember Paul Harvey back in the day? The rest of the story. It was kind of that kind of bend on it. So I really dig that. I spend my time watching a lot of rock stuff. I don't know. I'm just really like a professor of rock on YouTube. I really like his video that he has. Those videos that he puts out. And then what is it? History of Rock. John Bowden. He has some good ones, man. So I dig because a lot of times I can watch those shows and I can learn stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, that guy does a lot of homework to dig this information out. I've been a big rock fan for a lot of years, and this guy's telling me stuff that I didn't even know, So it's, where does he getting this information, man? Come on. Is there a book somewhere I can get? But I really dig that kind of stuff. I'm a big nut when it comes to reading autobiographies of rock stars. I don't know why, but I've always dug that lifestyle. I don't live that lifestyle by no means. I don't do drugs. I've never done drugs, and I drink occasionally, but I'm pretty tame. But I've always dug how these guys can go to the bottomless pit of drug use and come out as a winner and victorious, and they're touring again. I always kind of dug that kind of story, but it's kind of cool to just see what it takes to be a rock star. What it's like to write a song and to put an album together, and that kind of stuff's always fascinated me.
We have this portion of the show, and it is called Shameless Self-Promotion.
Shameless self-promotion.
And this is where you can let everybody know how they can follow your show or follow you on social media or just follow you when you're going shopping or any other kind of following.
Okay, so if you want to call me, it's 567-5309. Just call me Jenny. Big Jenny. Big Jenny, I got your number. Now, you can find me on YouTube. I have a YouTube podcast called The Pod Shack Presents. Now, the Pod Shack is my own little personal recording studio. Let me tell you how great a thing this is, man. Me and my wife, we have been renting a house. Me and my wife, we're both on our second marriage. She was married 23 years. I was married 20. And we've gotten together, and we've been together going on 10 years. And so in 16, we got married. But since we've been married, we've been renting a house. It's a nice house. I had no problem with it. It was a big old house, too. It was a really, really nice house. But I wanted to do some, podcasting and recording and that kind of stuff. And so I set up a little temporary studio in one of the rooms because I couldn't really do a whole lot with it as far as, altering the house because it wasn't mine. So I did the best I could to soundproof it, and it was decent. I mean, it wasn't great. It was decent. Back in, I think it was October, November, we had the opportunity to buy the house that my wife grew up in. Her mom was still living there, and she was moving in with my wife's younger sister. They have a mother-in-law house they built out behind their house for her. One of the cool things about this house was they had a really cool backyard. It's a big old backyard. So I'm like, okay, we're getting the studio. We're putting it back behind the house. So it took me about 4 months to get that all set up, situated, get everything kind of like I wanted it. I'm still like everybody else. I look at something, I'm like, no, that can be better. But we've got our own little studio here, the Podcheck Studio in Fort Worth, Texas, where we do voiceover work. We do podcast creation. We help people with audio production, whether you need some audio production for your podcast, whether you're needing somebody to do a jingle for you, that kind of stuff. And we produce our own podcast. And so you go to the Podcheck Presents Casual Conversations with Big Skinny. You can find my podcast, and it's on YouTube. We were on Spotify, but for some reason or another, I was getting more viewership and stuff on YouTube, and I was paying a buttload of money to be on, Spotify and iTunes and all that. And I didn't feel like I was getting my money's worth. So we're primarily just on YouTube at the moment. I might go back to Spotify eventually, but it's kind of hard sometimes to build, a medium for each. If I try to do one for both, then, when you're talking about somebody viewing your podcast and you're putting that on somebody that's listening to it, it's kind of like, when you're listening to a live comedy act that was something that somebody watched, you're missing that aspect of it because you're not there watching it in person. You miss the facial expressions, you miss the hand gestures, you miss the things that make it funny, So right now we're primarily on YouTube.
And you also do a voiceover service as well, right?
Yes, sir. I do voiceover work. I do, like I said, I do voiceover work. We do all kinds of production. We do stuff for commercials. I spent many years in radio, and that was part of our job is doing radio commercials. So we had to write them, we had to produce them, and we had to record them.
Is there an email address that everybody can write if they need a deep Texas voice for a voiceover?
You can go to Big Skinny at bigskinnyvoiceovers.net.
There you go. Kenney Big Skinny Pope, thank you so much for coming on down to the show. And again, his YouTube show is called The Podshack Presents Casual Conversations. Thank you so much, good friend.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, New York. Good night. You've been a great audience.
Don't forget to tip your waitress.
Have a good one, brother. Say hi to Danny.
We're on that internet thingy at Sherpalution.com.
And now it's time for Sherpa Suggestions.
So, since Kenney was in the world of radio, I figured for this week's Sherpa Suggestions, I would recommend to you some podcasts by other radio personalities. We have Elvis Duran Presents the 15-Minute Morning Show, The Bobby Bones Show, The Breakfast Club, The Michael Berry Show, The Brooklyn Boys, who were both on Z100, by the way, with Elvis Duran, The Mark Levin Podcast, The Clark Howard Podcast, Direct from Hollywood with Ryan Seacrest, and finally, The Steve Harvey Morning Show. How many people are listening to Steve Harvey right now? Survey says more than mine. A very special thanks to Big Skinny Kenney Pope for coming on down to the Sherpa Chalet and for doing that excellent audio recording job. Much appreciated to you, sir. And thanks to all of you for tuning in and listening this week. We'll be back next week with another episode. Of course we will. And while you're waiting, you can check the show out on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook, or even take a look at my website, Sherpalution.com, where you can see all of the episodes, and you can see the link to my T-Sherpa shop, or Ko-fi.com, where you can make a donation if you'd like. And if you want to do a free donation, I'll let you in on a little secret. There's a site called Vurbl.com, V-U-R-B-L. If you subscribe there, guess what? You will help monetize the show. That's all you have to do. You don't even have to take out your credit card, your checkbook, crack open your piggy bank, none of that stuff. Absolutely free. So think about it. If you'd like to make a contribution, that's not going to cost you anything. What are the odds of that ever happening? I don't know. All right, Mr. Bruce, you're my other favorite radio guy. I guess it's time to get on out of here. Would you mind escorting the people out the door? And you can take your hand off your ear. It's not 1920s radio. All right, folks. See you next time. Viva la Sherpalution!
Thanks for listening to Too Many Podcasts. Please disperse. You can go home now. I said you can go home now. Viva la Sherpalution. Viva la Sherpalution. Oh. Yeah, I'll come back now, you hear?